Hello, welcome to our Closing the Gap team at Columbian High School. We have been participating in Closing the Gap for the last 2 years. In year one, we did all of our training in Mansfield, and since then, we have been doing all of our training through Zoom, but we've been attending this for the last 2 years now. Our team here at the high school is Allison Dougherty and Emily Tobel. They work together with our English 10 students. In our math department, Doug Hartenstein and Lisa Wilson work together. They've been working together for 3 years and then 2 years with us on Closing the Gap. In year one, probably the biggest thing that we learned and that they taught us was what they call UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning. That is basically common language. They're very big on trying to pre-plan for barriers. So as you're planning your lessons, trying to think of the unexpected and what's going to happen. Those areas or the principles of UDL are multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. Each one of those has guidelines that help or go back to the overall common language of UDL. Something that we added, which we won't show during our slideshow because it's a little bit over 7 minutes, but it is an example of the teacher talking about treating her kids as baked potatoes. And in this video clip, she talks about all kids eating baked potatoes and how they all eat the same things, whether it's onions and chives, sour cream, and how she has these big lessons planned for her kids being baked potatoes. And then finding out that you have to put different toppings, and maybe some kids don't like baked potatoes at all.
So really our main takeaway from year one has been kind of like looking at, does a student have to be on an IEP or 504 in order for them to have specialized learning? And I mean, the answer is no, because everyone should have some kind of like universal design learning. And kind of going back to the potato thing, not everyone likes the same thing or it works for them. So one of the good things that we talked about was to offer options or choices with students, giving the students, the choice to show you what they know and in the best way for them to show you what they know. Another thing that really helps too are like graphic organizers, rubrics, kind of given those expectations of what they need to do. Anticipation guides to kind of give that background knowledge, some of that stuff that they'll need to know in order to be successful with the continuation of the unit. So really it's more just about having students talk more and having teachers talk less and be more a facilitator.
Year two of Closing the Gap, we talked a lot about co-teaching, how it's not hard and it doesn't have to be a lot of work. A little planning time can require high learning outcomes for students. You can split the class in half stay in the classroom, and teacher A takes half of the kids and they spend 15 to 20 minutes reviewing yesterday's homework, reading any questions they may have, and they kind of show the kids some different tricks to help them, or different strategies to help them remember the material, or that will help them understand the material. And meanwhile, the regular ed teacher may take another group of kids and do an extension of that activity, or they may teach the new vocabulary, or be prepared to do the next lesson. So it's kind of where you're remediating you're teaching, and then you're extending what you have taught the students so far. Another thing we did at the high school level was implement I can statements, so that every student knew the learning targets as I can do this and I can do that. So it gave students the opportunity to own some of their learning.
All right, a way to co-teach is to co-plan. I'm happy with this closing the gap training, because before, in my mind, a good co-teacher, looked like an intervention specialist and a regular education teacher. And then when an administrator walks in, you're not supposed to know who is who. And so that's pretty complicated here at the high school with scheduling and moving around all the time. So I was really happy to learn that co-planning has a really high outcome for students as well, and it's not all that hard. So obviously, when two teachers get together, two minds are better than one. And then we hear this a lot at the high school. We don't have common planning periods. Well, we can make this work, and I have this scenario here, but the example, so let's say that Mrs. Tobel, I work with Mr. Vasco third period, but Mrs. Lewis, who I also co-teach with, has planning third period, all right? So at some point during the week, Mr. Vasco's class is probably going to do some independent activity where I don't really need to be in the room, for students. Well, they'll either be doing MemBeam, which is all online, or no red ink, or independent reading. All right, so during that time, just once a week, I'll just pop over with Mrs. Lewis, and so then she and I can plan together. For the whole week if you're organized, or you could try to co-plan for a whole month, but that probably gets a little hectic. So if you could just meet with your co-teacher once a week to co-plan and go over activities, two minds are better than one. All right, and continued with co-planning. Right, it's important that the intervention specialist and the general education teacher get together and talk about the activities that you're going to do, because a lot of the times the intervention specialist can identify some possible barriers that are going to happen with the activity, like such as vocab or writing, or maybe it's like mathematics. But usually the intervention specialist, works with some of the lower kids more often, so they know, what some of the barriers may be. And then they can talk about, what strategies they need to use in order to overcome those barriers.
What we did is in this year, in year two, a lot of the professional development and sessions have focused on various activities that you can use in the classroom to help actively engage kids. And so we included several of them, not all of them, but and incorporated the websites along with those. The one that I hope I'm able to show you is a word wall activity. And with this, it was very simple to set up. The one that I chose was a game show where you can use simple concepts and make whether an individual game or a whole class activity. It just depends on what you want to do with that particular concept. So Emily, see if you can click on it, see if we can get it to play or get it to work. So go ahead and just type in a name. Yep, and click start. And so the game show, it's kind of fun. You go ahead, again, you can do it now that we have one-to-one laptops with the students. You can do it individually at their desk. You can get teams, whatever it is. You can multiply your score 50-50 extra time. It's just kind of fun. So see how you do, Miss Runyon. Go ahead, see if you can answer that and see what happens.
Oh boy.
And so it gives you the answer, and you can go through. It was just a short little activity. There's 5 questions to it. And again, it'll keep score. It's very similar to, if you've used Kahoot, whatever other those type of activities. You can make it as complicated or as simplistic as possible, depending upon your individual students or even your classes. So again, it's kind of fun. And that's what the whole idea of all these activities are, finding different ways to get the students actively engaged and involved in a variety of different activities.
So far at Columbian, like I said, we've been able to implement keeping people or pairs together. With Allison and Emily, we've been able to keep Doug and Lisa together. I think just the general understanding that these are kids. I mean, they're not my kids, your kids. These are just kids. So I think just having everybody understand that we are working with kids, and then how we go about it, whether we're splitting kids in half, we're doing station work. These are just kids that we are working with, um, you know, and just trying to add toppings on their potatoes to, make the lesson more appealing to them. We also talked about, like our objectives. We've always had those posted on the board. Last year we started the SO, just so kids knew why, why they were doing the objective, what was coming in the future that they would be aware of, how it all related, so kids could kind of see the future or the outcome that we were trying to ask them to do.
So last year, in Inclusion 10 with Emily, we had an opportunity to implement one of the strategies that they gave us for UDL, and we decided to implement a choice for like a big assessment at the end of a unit, which normally they are expected to write an essay of some sort at the end of each unit. However, we know not every student is the strongest in writing, but they might know the information, but we're just giving them a different way of showing us that they know the information. So last year, like you could do, like we did a plot chart, like we talked about narratives, and they could do their own plot chart where they created their own narrative and like used a plot chart to tell us like their story. Or they could do a one pager, which a one pager is where they take, a character, maybe their main character, they write down 5 quotes from their story that they made that the character said that were really important. And then they also write down 5 questions, maybe for the character, and they pretend to answer them as if they were the character. And pretty much the whole page is just supposed to be one big visual, one big drawing. So there was that option. And I think we also had just the traditional option of just writing a narrative. So they still had 3 options, and we found that those worked pretty well. So we're going to continue with doing that. And this year we're actually trying some station work, and we're planning on doing that actually this week. We are starting our 2nd unit, which is over the novel Things Fall Apart. So we have 4 stations in the slide, but with just us and with us being hybrid, we're going to condense it to 3 stations. So our first station will be with me, and we're going to do a bookmark vocab station. This book takes place in Nigeria, so the goal is for the students to make a bookmark with all the like names of the people and like how to pronounce them, so as they come across it they know how to say it and like what it means. We have a station 2, which you should have an independent station, which they're going to watch the video, which is like a 5-minute video explaining what culture is. And then from there, they'll go and kind of play around with Google Earth and just kind of explore Nigeria, what it looks like, where it's at on the map, and like writing down maybe 3 interesting things that they found from Google Earth. And then finally, our last station would be with Emily, my co-teacher. And there are some folk tales and proverbs like from Africa that she'll go over with them. And, you know, folk tales and proverbs are kind of a big topic in Things Fall Apart. So it's a good thing for her to go over with them and also kind of hit some of those standards. And Springboard's all about the standards. So.
For us in math, we're looking at using the stations for one of our concepts that are coming up actually in the next week and a half. Again, depending on if we're hybrid or whole group face to face. Station 1 and Miss Wilson, we looking at it's, and these are all interchangeable. And the flow is going to depend on how things go. But Miss Wilson will be working with strategies regarding homework questions and small group, more individual small group intervention or assistance. I'm going to be delivering the instruction through guided notes, the main concepts for factoring quadratics with A equals 1. And then station 3, students are actually doing some independent work where they'll be working on some practice problems through the worksheet, which will be incorporated into their homework. And then the last station, which is kind of a fun independent, it's called task card activity. If you're familiar with the game Clue, where the students have to solve or factor these quadratics, and each one they factor leads to a clue on who killed Mr. Quad. So it's just kind of a fun culminating activity as the students work through that particular concept.
Our last slide, this is just something that has stuck with us because we can relate and it was funny. But I'm an intervention specialist, and I have found myself being a Roomba in classrooms before. And so that just means that, like, you know, there's rows of desks and I've had a pattern, you know, I go up one row, down the other, up another, you know, down the row, you know, and then, oh, don't hit anybody's desks, you know. So in one of the presentations for Closing the Gap, they had said, you know, intervention specialists shouldn't be a Roomba in the classroom. And so, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess my takeaway from that is, you know, if I find myself being a Roomba, that's probably a time where I could leave the classroom and go plan or, you know, do an intervention with, you know, somebody else with a planning period then. So they wanted us to avoid being a Roomba in the classroom. So I believe that is our last slide. And we thank you for your time. And if you ever have any questions, let us know.